Somewhere in the frozen forests of medieval Finland, a peasant named Lalli raised an axe against a bishop, and by killing him became, in legend at least, the last defender of a people whose DNA doesn't match anyone else in Europe. Finland sits right next to Sweden. Same latitude, same climate, same Nordic look at a glance. But under the skin, Finns carry a genetic signature that traces back not to Scandinavia, but to Siberia. This is the story of how one small population became Europe's strangest genetic outlier, and the legendary man whose story still stands in for a Finland that refused to simply become Swedish. By the 1100s, Scandinavia had already gone Christian. Sweden, Denmark, Norway, kings, cathedrals, crusades. Finland was different. No unified kingdom, no shared church. Scattered tribes, the Finns proper, the Tavastians, the Karelians, living by hunting, fishing, and a religion of forest spirits and ancestor worship. To the Swedish crown, this looked like the edge of the civilized world, ripe for conquest and conversion. Around 1155, King Erik of Sweden is said to have sailed east with an English-born bishop named Henry on what later chroniclers called Sweden's first crusade into Finland. Here's where the story gets murky, and worth pausing on because the mystery itself is genuine. There is no contemporary record that a Bishop Henry ever existed. Historians consider him an apocryphal figure, his story first written down more than a century after his supposed death, in a hagiography composed to promote his sainthood. According to that later legend, Henry stopped at a farmhouse to resupply his men. The owner, a peasant named Lalli, was away. Henry's men took food and hay and left payment. But when Lalli returned, his wife told him they'd taken everything and paid nothing. Enraged, Lalli chased the bishop's party down and killed Henry on the frozen surface of Lake Köyliö. Henry became Finland's patron saint. Lalli became the villain of church art for centuries, literally sculpted underfoot in statues of the sainted bishop. But by the 1800s, as Finnish national identity was taking shape, the story flipped. Lalli was reimagined as a folk hero, a man who refused outside rule on his own land, whatever his original motive really was. Strip away the legend, and what's left is a folk memory of a Finland that resisted assimilation into someone else's kingdom. And that resistance, it turns out, shows up in the genome too, even if Lalli himself may never have swung an axe at all. Here's the part that surprises most people. Finns and Swedes, despite sharing a border for 1,000 years, are genetically quite distinct. Modern population genetics consistently places Finland as an outlier compared to its Scandinavian neighbours. The first clue to why isn't buried in a grave. It's sitting in plain sight in the language. Nearly every language in Europe, English, Swedish, Russian, Italian, descends from a single ancient family, Indo-European. Finnish doesn't. It belongs to the Uralic language family, closely related to Estonian and, much more distantly, to Hungarian. Its roots trace back not to Western Europe, but toward the Ural Mountains, on the border of Europe and Siberia. Genetics tells a closely related story, though the details are more layered than Finns came from Siberia alone. Roughly 58% of Finnish men today carry Y chromosome haplogroup N, a lineage geneticists trace back through Central Asia and Siberia, and ultimately to an origin in East Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Ancient DNA studies show this Siberian-linked ancestry entering the Baltic region at least 3,500 years ago, carried by early Uralic-speaking populations. It didn't replace the people already living there, early European hunter-gatherers and later Baltic farming populations. It mixed with them. Recent genetic research even shows two separate branches of this haplogroup arriving in Finland by different routes, one from the northeast, more directly tied to that Siberian source, and one from the southwest via Estonia, tied more closely to Baltic ancestry. So even within Finnish DNA, there's an east-west split baked into the country's own genetic map. The second half of the mystery is what happened after these groups settled. For centuries, Finland's population stayed small and scattered, pockets of settlers spreading slowly into an unforgiving landscape of forest, lakes, and long winters. When a population stays small and relatively isolated for generations, geneticists call what happens next a founder effect. Whatever rare genetic variants existed in the original small group get amplified over time, simply because so much of the population descends from the same limited set of ancestors. Finland is considered one of the clearest founder effect populations studied anywhere in the world. This isolation left something else behind, a set of roughly 40 rare genetic disorders that occur in Finland far more often than in most of the rest of Europe. Clinicians and geneticists refer to this collectively as the Finnish disease heritage. It's not a flaw, it's a signature, a direct genetic record of exactly how isolated this founding population became. Go further north into Lapland and the story branches again. The Sami, Europe's only recognised indigenous people, share some ancestral roots with Finns, but ancient DNA suggests their range once extended further south than it does today, before a genetic and linguistic shift pushed Finnish-speaking populations into what had been more Sami territory. Finns and Sami are related, but they are not the same population, genetically or culturally. Which brings the story back to that frozen lake, and the man, real or not, remembered for standing his ground on it. Whether Lalli existed exactly as the legend says, the story he represents lines up with something the genetics actually confirms. Finland was never simply an extension of Sweden. It was, and its DNA shows it, its own distinct population long before any bishop, real or legendary, ever set foot on its shores. The Crusade Christianized Finland. It never fully absorbed it, genetically or linguistically. Nearly 1,000 years later, Finns still speak a language no Swede can casually understand, and carry ancestry, that Siberian-linked Y chromosome lineage above all, that no Swedish genome shares at anywhere near the same frequency. So is Finnish DNA not European? No, that overstates it. Finns are Europeans, and have been for thousands of years. What's accurate is this. Finland is genetically distinct within Europe, shaped by an ancestral migration with deep roots in Siberia, preserved by centuries of geographic isolation, and marked permanently by a founder effect that still shows up in Finnish medicine today. It isn't a mystery of hidden truths or forbidden history. It's one of the best documented, most genuinely unusual population stories in all of European genetics. No exaggeration required. An indigenous-rooted language nobody else in Europe speaks. A genetic signature that runs back through Siberia. A disease heritage found nowhere else on Earth in quite the same combination. And the enduring memory of one man on a frozen lake, standing in for a people who never entirely became someone else's. That's Finland's DNA mystery, not folklore, but written into the genome itself.